Greenland has been largely ignored by global powers for decades. A massive island of ice and rock with 56,000 people, minimal economic activity, and limited strategic relevance beyond Cold War radar installations. But suddenly, everyone is looking at Greenland simultaneously. The United States talks about purchasing it. China invests in mining projects. Russia expands Arctic military presence. The European Union funds infrastructure. This isn't coincidence or sudden interest in frozen landscapes. Greenland sits at the center of converging transformations that will reshape global power competition for the next century. Climate change is opening Arctic shipping routes that reduce Asia-Europe transit times by 40%. The ice sheet is melting to reveal massive deposits of rare earth elements, essential for modern technology and green energy transitions. The shortest missile flight paths between major powers cross Arctic airspace, where Greenland's geography makes it indispensable for early warning systems. Greenland isn't suddenly important. It's always been important, but the conditions that made it accessible and strategically critical are only now emerging. The Arctic power shift isn't about Greenland itself. It's about control of the pathways, resources, and strategic positions that Greenland's geography provides. And as climate change accelerates, Arctic ice melts, and great power competition intensifies. Greenland transforms from frozen periphery to contested prize in the competition that will define 21st century geopolitics. Understanding Greenland's sudden strategic importance requires examining the specific resources, routes, and military advantages that climate change and technology advancement are making accessible. The rare earth elements dimension is where economics and geopolitics intersect most directly. Rare earths are the 17 elements essential for modern electronics, renewable energy, military systems, and advanced manufacturing. Neodymium and dysprosium are critical for powerful permanent magnets in wind turbines and electric vehicle motors. Lanthanum and cerium are used in petroleum refining catalysts. Europium and terbium enable LED and display technologies. Yttrium is essential for lasers and superconductors. Despite the name, rare earths aren't particularly rare geologically. They're called rare because economically viable concentrations are uncommon, and extraction is technically complex and environmentally damaging. China dominates global rare earth production with approximately 70% of mining and over 90% of processing capacity. This dominance wasn't natural resource endowment. It resulted from deliberate Chinese industrial policy over 3 decades. China accepted the environmental costs of rare earth extraction that Western countries wouldn't tolerate domestically. China invested in processing technology. China priced aggressively to drive competitors out of business. By 2010, China effectively monopolized the rare earth supply chain. Western manufacturers depend entirely on Chinese rare earth supplies for products from smartphones to F-35 fighter jets. The historical trajectory reveals the strategic calculation. In the 1980s, the United States dominated rare earth production through the Mountain Pass mine in California, which produced over half of global supply. But rare earth processing produces toxic and radioactive waste that's expensive to handle safely. Environmental regulations in the United States and other Western countries made rare earth extraction increasingly costly. China offered an alternative. Lax environmental enforcement allowed cheap production despite environmental damage. Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping reportedly said in 1992, "The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths." The statement signaled strategic intent to leverage rare earth control as geopolitical asset, similar to OPEC's oil leverage. Chinese companies expanded production in Inner Mongolia, particularly around Baotou, creating the world's largest rare earth processing center. Wastewater from processing created vast, toxic tailings ponds. Local cancer rates increased dramatically, but production costs stayed low enough to undercut competitors globally. By 2000, Mountain Pass Mine in California closed due to environmental violations and inability to compete with Chinese prices. Australian rare earth producer Lynas scaled back operations. the U.S. rare earth industry effectively ceased to exist. Western manufacturers had no alternative but to source rare earths from China. The dependency was complete by 2010 when China briefly restricted exports during the Senkaku Islands dispute with Japan, demonstrating weaponization potential. This dependency became strategic vulnerability when China briefly restricted rare earth exports to Japan during a 2010 territorial dispute. The restriction lasted only weeks, but demonstrated that China could weaponize rare earth access for political purposes. Western governments recognized that supply chain concentration in single country creates unacceptable strategic risk. The solution requires developing alternative rare earth sources outside Chinese control. But where? Greenland's rare earth deposits are among the world's largest and most economically viable. The Kvanefjeld deposit in southern Greenland contains estimated 11 million tons of rare earth oxides, one of the largest deposits globally. The Tanbreeze deposit holds primarily heavy rare earths, which are more valuable than light rare earths for advanced applications, and even more concentrated in Chinese production. Multiple smaller deposits exist across southern Greenland, in areas becoming accessible as ice melts. Geological surveys suggest total resources could exceed 50 million tons of rare earth oxides, enough to supply global demand for decades. The economic viability is improving as extraction technology advances and environmental regulations balance strategic need against environmental protection. Rare earth mining is inherently messy. The ores contain thorium and uranium that complicate processing, and extraction requires acids that can contaminate water supplies. Greenland's environmental standards are strict, which delayed projects for years, but strategic imperative is shifting calculations. Mining rare earths in Greenland with environmental oversight is preferable to permanent dependence on Chinese supplies that could be cut off for political reasons. China recognized Greenland's potential early and invested strategically. Chinese companies proposed financing Kvanefjeld mine development. Chinese firms bid on infrastructure projects. The pattern followed Chinese practice elsewhere: invest in resource extraction, gain long-term supply contracts, and establish economic presence that creates political influence. But Western governments, particularly the United States, pressured Denmark and Greenland to reject or restrict Chinese investment specifically to prevent China from controlling alternative rare earth sources. The result is competition where Chinese investment offers development capital Greenland needs, while Western governments offer market access and political support but less upfront financing. Greenland, with population of 56,000, finds itself caught between great powers competing for rare earth access. The rare earth deposits aren't just economic opportunity, they're geopolitical leverage that transforms Greenland from irrelevant to indispensable in technology supply chain competition. The shipping route transformation is the second pillar of Greenland's strategic emergence. Arctic sea ice is melting faster than climate models predicted. Summer ice coverage has decreased over 40% since satellite monitoring began in 1979. The Northwest Passage through Canadian Arctic and Northern Sea Route along Russian coast are becoming reliably navigable for longer periods each year. These routes could revolutionize global shipping by cutting distances between Asia and Europe by thousands of miles. The traditional shipping route from Shanghai to Rotterdam via Suez Canal covers approximately 20,000 kilometers and takes 30 to 35 days. The Northern Sea Route through Arctic covers approximately 14,000 kilometers and takes 20 to 25 days, a 30–40% reduction in distance and transit time. For high-value goods where delivery speed matters, this is transformative. For energy shipments where fuel costs are a significant portion of total cost, the shorter route is economically compelling, even accounting for ice navigation challenges. The economic calculations reveal the incentive structure. A container ship carrying 10,000 TEU from Shanghai to Rotterdam via Suez consumes approximately 200 to 250 tons of fuel daily. At $500–600 per ton, daily fuel costs are $100,000 to $150,000. Saving 10 days through Arctic route saves $1.5 million in fuel costs per voyage. With canal fees for Suez averaging $500,000 to $700,000, the total savings approaches $2 million per voyage. For ships making 10 to 15 round trips annually, that's $20 to $30 million in annual savings. The operational challenges partially offset these savings. Arctic navigation requires ice-strengthened hulls costing 20 to 30% more than standard vessels. Insurance rates in Arctic routes are higher due to limited rescue infrastructure. Icebreaker escort services, when required, add costs. The navigation season is limited, currently reliable only July through October. Seasonal variability means shipping companies cannot rely exclusively on Arctic routes, but must maintain dual route capability. But as ice coverage decreases and navigation season extends, the economic calculation tilts toward Arctic routes. By 2040, climate models project ice-free Arctic summers becoming routine. Year-round navigation may become feasible by 2050. This transforms Arctic routes from seasonal alternative to primary shipping corridor for Asia-Europe trade, worth over $700 billion annually. Greenland's geography makes it central to Arctic shipping, regardless of which route develops. The Northwest Passage requires transiting waters near Greenland's western coast. The Northern Sea Route is more distant, but ships using it need port facilities for refueling, resupply, and emergency repairs. Greenland's southern ports could provide those services. Most significantly, Greenland sits adjacent to the Denmark Strait and Davis Strait, which are the main passages between the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Any ship transiting Arctic routes must pass near Greenland unless taking much longer routes around the pole. The economic implications are enormous. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port specifically because it's the optimal endpoint for Asian goods shipped via Suez. If Arctic routes become primary shipping lanes, northern European ports gain advantage over Mediterranean ports. Chinese goods could ship directly to northern Europe through Arctic, bypassing Suez entirely. This redistributes trade flows and economic power within Europe, while making Greenland's ports strategically valuable for whoever controls them. The strategic implications are equally significant. Shipping routes are strategic assets that powers compete to control or at minimum ensure access to. China's Belt and Road Initiative invests heavily in ports and logistics networks, specifically to secure shipping routes. If Arctic routes become major commercial corridors, China will want port access in Greenland, just as China has invested in Piraeus in Greece and Hambantota in Sri Lanka. The United States will want to prevent Chinese port presence in Greenland for the same reasons the United States opposes Chinese port control elsewhere. Ports enable not just commercial shipping, but potential naval presence. Denmark technically controls Greenland's foreign policy and security, but Greenland has substantial autonomy and could theoretically declare independence. The independence question becomes geopolitical because whoever Greenland aligns with after independence gains strategic advantage in Arctic. Chinese investment could create economic dependency that shapes Greenland's political orientation. American security guarantees and market access could bind Greenland to Western Bloc. The competition for Greenland's alignment through infrastructure investment and economic support is already underway. The military dimension is the third and perhaps most critical aspect of Greenland's strategic importance. The shortest missile flight paths between the United States and Russia cross Arctic airspace directly over Greenland. During the Cold War, this made Greenland essential for early warning radar systems. Thule Air Base in northern Greenland hosts radar installations that monitor for incoming missiles and spacecraft. These systems provided the few minutes of warning time that made nuclear deterrence credible during Cold War. Soviet missiles would be detected during flight, giving American command authority time to launch retaliatory strikes. The technical capabilities at Thule have evolved substantially. The original ballistic missile early warning system, BMEWS, from the 1960s, used massive phased array radars that could detect missile launches at ranges exceeding 3,000 miles. The upgraded early warning radar, EWR, installed in the 2000s, improved range to 3,000 plus miles and added capability to track satellites and space debris. The newest Space Force installations add space surveillance capabilities, detecting objects as small as 10 centimeters in low Earth orbit. The detection range matters because missile flight times from Russia to United States are approximately 30 minutes for intercontinental ballistic missiles. Detection at launch from Russian territory provides maximum warning. Detection over Greenland provides 10 to 15 minutes of warning, enough for command authority to reach secure facilities and launch retaliatory strikes if nuclear war protocols are activated. The few minutes difference between early detection and late detection determines whether deterrence functions by ensuring retaliation or fails by allowing decapitation strikes that prevent response. The hypersonic threat changes the calculation. Russia's avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle travels at Mach 20 plus and maneuvers during flight, making trajectory prediction difficult. China's DF-ZF hypersonic weapon demonstrated similar capabilities. These systems compress warning times from 30 minutes to potentially 10-15 minutes by skipping traditional ballistic trajectories. Early detection from Arctic installations becomes even more critical when warning times shrink. The strategic logic persists despite Cold War's end. Russia maintains large nuclear arsenal and has developed hypersonic missiles specifically designed to evade missile defenses. China is expanding its nuclear forces and developing missiles capable of reaching the United States. North Korea has demonstrated intercontinental ballistic missile capability. The threat matrix hasn't disappeared, it's diversified. Early warning systems in Greenland remain essential for detecting launches and providing warning time measured in minutes that determines whether nuclear deterrence functions or fails. The radar installations themselves are being upgraded with more sophisticated sensors that can track not just ballistic missiles but hypersonic glide vehicles and satellite threats. Space is increasingly militarized with anti-satellite weapons and orbital platforms that could strike ground targets. Monitoring space requires northern latitude installations where satellites pass overhead more frequently. Greenland's geography makes it optimal for space surveillance that's becoming critical as military operations extend into orbit. The climate change irony is that warming makes Arctic more accessible for commercial and military purposes simultaneously. Opening shipping routes means more commercial traffic requiring monitoring. Melting ice means more accessible coastline requiring patrol. New resources mean more economic activity requiring protection. Arctic military presence is expanding specifically because Arctic is becoming operationally relevant in ways it wasn't when ice made access difficult and expensive. Russia has invested heavily in Arctic military infrastructure, reopening Soviet-era bases, deploying new icebreakers, establishing air defense systems along Northern Sea Route. The Russian investments are about securing Northern Sea Route, protecting resource extraction in Russian Arctic territories, and maintaining strategic position for submarine operations. Russian submarines operate under Arctic ice where detection is difficult. As ice melts and submarine detection technology advances, Arctic becomes more contested military space. The specific Russian capabilities reveal the scale of investment. Russia operates over 40 icebreakers, including nuclear-powered vessels capable of year-round Arctic operations, more than all other countries combined. The United States operates 2 aging icebreakers with 1 typically non-operational. This asymmetry gives Russia dominant position in Arctic maritime operations. Russia reopened or established military bases at Nagurskoye on Alexandra Land, Temp on Kotelny Island, and Severny Cleaver on Kotelny Island. These bases host air defense systems, radar installations, and accommodate several thousand personnel. The bases provide layered coverage of Northern Sea Route and Russian Arctic coastline. S-400 air defense systems deployed at these bases can engage aircraft and missiles at ranges exceeding 200 miles, denying airspace access to potential adversaries. The submarine dimension is particularly significant. Russian ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, operate from bases on Kola Peninsula and under Arctic ice, where detection by Western anti-submarine warfare assets is difficult. As ice coverage decreases, submarine operations become simultaneously easier, more open water, and more dangerous, better detection opportunities. Russia's Arctic militarization partly aims to maintain submarine survivability as the strategic environment changes. China declared itself a near-Arctic state, despite being located far from Arctic Circle. The declaration signals Chinese interest in Arctic governance, shipping routes, and resources. China cannot project military power in Arctic directly, but Chinese presence in Greenland, through investments or port access, would extend Chinese reach northward. The United States views this as unacceptable security risk. Chinese military or dual-use facilities in Greenland would compromise North American air defense and Arctic surveillance. The governance dimension creates complications because Greenland's status is ambiguous. Greenland is autonomous territory within Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark handles Greenland's foreign policy and defense, but Greenland has internal self-government and is moving incrementally toward full independence. Independence would require Greenland to establish its own foreign relations and security arrangements. With a population of 56,000 and GDP of approximately $3 billion, independent Greenland would be militarily and economically vulnerable. This vulnerability creates the strategic competition. China could offer economic support that makes independence viable financially. Russia could offer security arrangements. The United States could provide security guarantees and market access. European Union could offer association status. Each option creates different strategic outcomes for Arctic governance and great power competition. An independent Greenland aligned with China would transform Arctic geopolitics by giving China foothold in Western Hemisphere. An independent Greenland aligned with NATO would extend Western security architecture further into Arctic. Denmark is caught between Greenland's autonomy aspirations and NATO security commitments. Danish governments support Greenland's self-determination in principle, but also recognize that Greenland's strategic location makes its alignment critical for Danish security and NATO's northern flank. The compromise is gradual autonomy with continued Danish defense responsibility, but this may not satisfy Greenlandic independence advocates or address great power competition for influence. The historical precedent is Iceland, which was Danish territory until independence in 1944 and later hosted U.S. military installations during Cold War. Iceland's strategic location in North Atlantic made it critical for monitoring Soviet submarines and supporting Atlantic convoy protection. The parallel suggests that Greenland's independence might follow similar path. Formal independence but continued military cooperation with NATO and U.S. presence. But that assumes Greenland makes the same alignment choices Iceland did, which isn't guaranteed if Chinese or Russian economic support is attractive enough. The climate change acceleration makes these issues urgent rather than theoretical long-term concerns. Arctic ice loss is accelerating beyond climate model predictions. The economic viability of Arctic shipping is improving yearly. Rare Earth deposits are becoming accessible as ice melts. The timeline for Greenland's strategic importance isn't decades, it's now. The investments and alignments being made today will lock in advantages for decades because infrastructure has long life and political relationships have momentum. The comparative context shows Greenland's situation isn't unique. It's part of broader pattern where climate change and resource competition are transforming previously peripheral regions into contested strategic spaces. Antarctica faces similar dynamics with resource exploitation, prevented by treaty, but increasingly tempting as technology advances. The South China Sea's importance grew as regional powers competed for resources and shipping routes. The Sahel region became geopolitically significant as climate change drove instability and external powers competed for influence. But Greenland is unique in combining all three strategic dimensions, resources, routes, and military positioning, in single location. Most contested spaces have one or two dimensions, but not all three. This concentration of strategic value makes Greenland more likely to see competition intensify rather than resolve through negotiation or international agreements. The question is whether Greenland's transformation happens cooperatively through international frameworks or competitively through great power competition. The Arctic Council exists as forum for Arctic governance, but has no enforcement mechanism and excludes China from membership. The Law of the Sea Treaty governs maritime claims, but doesn't address security competition or resource extraction in disputed areas. No framework exists for managing great power competition over territories transitioning from peripheral to strategic. The trajectory suggests competition rather than cooperation. China's Arctic strategy explicitly challenges Western dominance in Arctic governance. Russia's military investments prioritize capability for Arctic conflict. The United States treats Greenland as security priority that justifies excluding rivals. These positions aren't compatible with cooperative governance frameworks. The competition is already underway through investments, infrastructure projects, and diplomatic pressure. What's unclear is whether the competition remains economic and political or escalates to military dimensions. Greenland's population finds itself at center of geopolitical storm they didn't create and cannot control. Greenlanders want economic development, infrastructure investment, and eventual independence from Denmark. What they're getting is great power competition that treats Greenland as strategic prize rather than autonomous political community. The economic opportunities are real. Rare earth mining could transform Greenland's economy. But the strategic competition means those opportunities come with strings attached. Chinese investment comes with Chinese influence. Western support comes with security expectations. There's no neutral path where Greenland develops economically without becoming aligned in great power competition. The Arctic power shift with Greenland at its center isn't distant future speculation. It's current reality that's accelerating as climate change makes Arctic accessible, technology makes resources extractable, and great power competition makes strategic positioning critical. Everyone suddenly cares about Greenland because everyone suddenly needs what Greenland provides: rare earths for technology independence, shipping routes for commercial advantage, and geography for military positioning. The prize isn't Greenland's ice or rock. It's control of the strategic space that Greenland's location commands. And that space is becoming the most contested real estate on Earth.